Good morning.
And we're live this morning, awaiting remarks from FCC Chair Ajit Pai. He is speaking at the American Cable Association Summit here in Washington. Live coverage here on C-SPAN 2. We expect it to start in just a moment.
President and CEO Matthew Polka.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our ACA Connect Summit 26. Nice to have you back with us. Hope you enjoyed all of our great speakers from yesterday, as well as a great night out and with friends and also with our partners. Great show yesterday, great show floor, so thank you, everybody, for making this a really, really special event. So I have a great privilege this morning and honor to welcome FCC Chairman Ajit Pai on his return to our ACA Connect Summit. Chairman Pai has traveled to our systems where he has seen our investment firsthand. He spearheaded a regulatory environment that encourages our members to invest in and deploy their products and services in rural America and to help close the digital divide. The investment by ACA Connect's members has been made possible by Chairman Pai's light-touch regulatory approach to broadband. One of Chairman Pai's statements, his philosophy, is that the FCC is at its best when it proceeds on the basis of consensus. Good communications policy knows no partisan affiliation, and at ACA Connects, we couldn't agree more wholeheartedly with that statement. He knows that broadband is critical in modern life. It's created a phenomenon that he has called the democratization of entrepreneurship. He said, with a good idea and a broadband connection, entrepreneurs anywhere can compete in ways unthinkable a generation ago. Because some Americans still don't have sufficient broadband, he's also focused on rural broadband issues that is near and dear to the hearts of our members, where we have worked collaboratively and in partnership to make sure that we close that digital divide. He's fought to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs, and he wants to make sure that every federal program under the FCC's purview gets the most bang for the buck. Please join me in giving a great America's Communications Association welcome to FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. Mr. Chairman. Nice to have you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you. Have a seat.
Thank you all.
There you go.
Thanks very much. Very kind. Thank you. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
There you go.
Thanks for the warm welcome.
Nice to have you, sir.
Yeah,
It's
great to be back.
Such a privilege. We meant every word when we said about the fact that you understand the investment and deployment that our members have provided. So thank you for your encouragement.
No, my pleasure. Thanks to all of your members for doing the hard work necessary to make this happen. I was struck by your testimony on February 13th for Senate Commerce Committee, where your august president made some really insightful remarks, but none of them, I think, was more insightful than saying, look, Congress and the FCC need to respect private investment. We need to set a framework that enables your members to take risks, and you guys have taken the risks and helped build out broadband to thousands, millions of people across the country, so I appreciate that.
Well, we have said, and we demonstrated that if regulations on ISPs were lifted, heavy-handed regulations, that investment and deployment would occur. And I think you can say, and you've seen, that this group has done it. What has been your experience since your order was implemented in December of 2017? What have you seen in terms of the investment and deployment across the country?
I think it's been very positive, and I would start from some of the predictions that were made back in December of 2017. This is the end of the internet as we know it. You're going to have to pay $5 per tweet. The internet will work one word at a time. And we've kept a list of some of those predictions, and I'm happy to say that every one of them has been proven false. In fact, a new report came out in December of 2018 that speeds are up over 35% from December of 2017 until December of 2018. Millions more Americans are benefiting from fiber than ever before. Infrastructure investment is up. And all of these indicators are positive. And so the argument we have made is say, look, this bipartisan framework that we had for 2 decades, starting with the Clinton administration, continuing through for almost 20 years, the one that we restored in 2017, that has been the right one for Americans consumers, because at the end of the day, what Americans want is better, faster, cheaper broadband. And so I think some of those hysterical predictions are looking increasingly silly as time goes on, and that's thanks in part to the fact that your members are the ones out there on the front lines, especially in smaller towns and rural areas, making the promise of digital opportunity a real one.
I've always found it interesting how people will freely use the internet to criticize how they can't freely use the internet. So.
I often say I've been doing all these town halls, college campuses, various places, and inevitably I get a question like this, and I tell them, look, you can still hate tweet your favorite FCC chairman without any kind of impediment, and I think it's just illustrative of the fact that a lot of people had these fears that were ginned up by some Beltway special interests, and those fears are now being proven false. The internet works better than ever, and we're going to continue to execute on this agenda because we believe that this is the best way for everybody to win, for America's internet economy to thrive.
What's one of the messages we'll be taking up to the Hill this afternoon and throughout the day, which is, it works. We have heard the message. We are your partner here at Washington to deliver broadband where it needs to go and to solve the problems of rural America, and just continue to allow us to do that. And we will take care of our customers, and we will make sure that they have free access to the internet.
I agree, and as you were saying in your opening remarks, I truly believe that your mission knows no partisan affiliation. I mean, getting better broadband out there is not a Republican issue, it's not a Democratic issue, it's an American issue. And I see that every time I travel, whether it's the Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico, or Pembroke, New Hampshire, or Gulfport, Mississippi, or Baker City, Oregon. I mean, these are the towns that are yearning to be a part of the digital economy, and your members are making that happen.
So let me ask you this. We are so happy to learn of your decision to commit to stay on as chairman. That's delighted us. What?
Well, in fairness, I mean, Judge Judy told me she wasn't retiring anytime soon, so I thought, okay, I've got to stick with a day job for now. But we'll see. We'll see.
So, tell us what's led to that decision.
For me, it was just the excitement about continuing to execute on our agenda. It was a momentous 2 years, of course, but the job isn't done. I mean, our top mission of closing the digital divide, of modernizing our regulations, of extending digital opportunity to everybody has not yet been accomplished. And so there's so much more that we want to do. And to have the ability to work with the FCC's fantastic 1,400-member staff has just been amazing. And so they believe in this mission as well. They work every single day to make sure that we execute this agenda. And also, I just enjoy traveling around the country. I mean, just the last couple of days, I was in Atlanta talking with some folks about what digital opportunity means, especially for entrepreneurs, minorities, and women, and other underrepresented populations. And broadband really is a gateway for opportunity in the 21st century. And so to be one small piece of the puzzle to help make that happen has just been extremely rewarding. So, any
particular story in your travels that really comes to mind to say this is really an example of what this means?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. Well, I will confess, I'm just coming back from Atlanta where Dominique Wilkins, the former NBA great, and I did some events together to highlight the promise of telemedicine, how broadband and healthcare can really intersect to benefit people, especially people with diabetes who need to be monitored remotely, or pregnant women who've just given birth and leave the hospital and their vital signs need to be monitored. So that was pretty cool. I mean, the 15-year-old in me was thinking, this is Dominique Wilkins. Oh, this is unbelievable. But the stories that really resonate with me, the ones I carry around all the time, are the 8th grader that I met in Jemez Pueblo, New Mexico, who told me that for the first time her school had broadband and what it means to be able to do her homework in school. Or it's the crew in Pembroke, New Hampshire that told me that because of our regulatory reforms, they're now able to hire more people, build more infrastructure, and able to connect people in rural New Hampshire. It's the people in Gulfport, Mississippi who've told me that because of our reforms, they're now taking the risks to build broadband out to unserved parts of the country. I mean, these are the people who you're never going to see on the front pages of the papers or on cable TV, but these are the ones who are critical to making the American dream a reality. And that's what motivates me to come into the office every day and pore over these 50, 100-page FCC orders and make sure we get it right, is because if we get it right, then all of you can do what you do best, which is to connect these Americans with opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, because the 15,000 employees of our American Cable Association members and 8 million subscribers are committed to making that happen and really bringing broadband in their communities to fundamentally change communities. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. I can't even imagine how hard it is, and I've seen it up close. It's not easy, and these networks don't have to be built. So we want to make sure that we do everything we can to maximize the incentives you have to pursue your own business cases.
So you mentioned your agenda. Let me cover a few things. I would call it an FCC Grand Slam. You ended Title II regulation of ISPs. You're facilitating pole attachments, a huge issue for our members. You're expediting access to public rights-of-way at reasonable cost, and you're opening large blocks of spectrum. How can you top this?
I mean, that's a pretty ambitious agenda in itself.
Sure is.
And a part of that agenda has been inspired by ACA's advocacy, so thank you for that. Pole attachments alone, I mean, people's eyes glaze over when I describe why this is important, but as your testimony pointed out, this is 13% of the cost of building a broadband network. That's a pretty big number, and so to be able to minimize that cost is significant. So going forward, we're going to continue to execute on those types of things. Nothing in particular, just what you see is what you get. We're going to keep modernizing those regulations and making sure that we maximize, as I said, the incentives for executing on the business case.
Well, you focused as well a lot on smaller operator relief, whether it's granting waivers of the accessible user interface requirement, reducing the disparity between DBS and cable regulatory fees, eliminating the Form 325 data collection, allowing for electronic delivery of MVPD notices, and on and on and on. I mean, we certainly applaud you for those actions, but what do you see, coming down the pike related to not just smaller cable and broadband providers, but indeed how you can help smaller businesses facilitate and provide more services?
Well, we've done a lot, and as you mentioned, but there's also more to come, and it comes from our basic recognition, and this is a recognition that is all too often lost here in Washington, that regulation has a disproportionate effect on smaller businesses. It's the big corporations that will always have fleets of lawyers and accountants and compliance officers to throw at a problem. But it is the smaller companies that are often the ones who bear the brunt. They are the ones who are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, in terms of investment that has to be diverted away from CapEx and towards OpEx to managing these kinds of compliance requirements. And that's part of the reason why we do what we do. You mentioned some of them, but we have more to come. In fact, this afternoon, we will be circulating another one of our media modernization initiative orders to get rid of some of the hard copy requirements for maintaining your channel lineups in your cable offices. I'm sure it's been many years since you've had someone stop by the office and say, hey, can you just tell us what the cable channel lineup is? We're getting rid of that regulation, hopefully, in 3 weeks at our April 12th vote. There's much more to come. Our staff is working really hard on a number of other initiatives that I think would be of interest to you. For example, leased access reform. That's one of the things we are actively studying, and I would hope that those reforms will be outlined in the near future. There's an electronic delivery of MVPD communications proceeding we've had ongoing for a while. Your input has been really critical on that in terms of the communications you have with broadcasters, so we're actively studying that one as well. Finally, the scope of local franchising authority under Section 621, an old chestnut that's been around for a while. We've been actively studying that one too, and so we look forward on all of these fronts to ultimately delivering a more modernized set of regulations that work for the benefit of smaller companies in particular, so that you don't have to go through some of these regulatory hoops that are no longer relevant or necessary in 2019.
Our association's been around for 26 years, and when we started on the very thing you said, which is things that happen in Washington by way of laws and regulation have a disproportionate impact on smaller businesses that have fewer customers per mile. So that's music to our ears to hear that, and the fact that you recognize that as part of the deployment of these advanced services that we have to take into account the voice of small business. So thank you for that.
My pleasure, and I just wish that part of the argument got more traction. It's easy to say, well, okay, this big company is benefiting from deregulation, but those folks, and nobody pays attention to the folks out in Zelienople who have to take risks to go to that head end and make a business case work. I mean, there should be as much media attention there, because those are the folks who are really taking a serious risk when it comes to raising funds, hiring work crews, building infrastructure, managing compliance, and all those things that have to work and come together to form a successful business. It's not easy to do, and so we recognize that at the FCC, and we'll continue to respect that.
I'm from Pittsburgh, and Zelienople is near Pittsburgh, served by our good friends in Armstrong. And that's rural areas, so you certainly have been out there in the snow even.
It is, yes, indeed. It was a great part of the country, and I won't bug you about Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, because I know you're a Pittsburgher, but
We've moved on, thank you.
Wow, all right.
We've moved on. We got your safety too, I think, from the Chiefs.
You did, I know, good luck with that. So our defense wasn't exactly our strong suit, but hopefully he serves you better than he served us.
So the bet was how long in the half hour would it take before we got to football, so there it was. 16 minutes and 32 seconds, right there for sure.
Exactly.
So let me ask you about another important issue that we have been advocating, and that's the C-band proceeding.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's attracted lots of attention as you're looking.
So I hear. Yes.
So you hear, exactly. We've helped to bring it before you. Regarding the 500 megahertz of prime spectrum real estate that you want to make available for 5G, but from a smaller operator perspective, there's obviously some concern regarding interference of satellite signals and who really will control that, whether that will be private industry that controls how that is accomplished, or what hand the FCC will have in it. How can you, from an FCC perspective and the Commission, ensure that through this process that the specific interests of smaller operators are heard through it?
This is a good question and a very critical and complicated issue. One of my favorite movie characters might say, this is a very complicated issue, Maud. A lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, if there are any Big Lebowski fans out there. But so this is a very complicated one. So on one hand, we recognize that 5G, the next generation of wireless connectivity, is a critical part of the wireless future. We want America to lead on 5G technologies, and one critical part of that is making sure that more spectrum is available for 5G innovation and investment. We've focused a lot on high band, millimeter wave spectrum, but mid-band is also important too. And so that 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz band is something that has attracted a lot of interest, and in particular, the potential for 200 megahertz or more to be allocated for 5G services. On the other hand, we do understand that there are a number of people, especially broadcasters, small cable operators, and others, who rely on that spectrum as well for the delivery of critical services. And so one of the questions we have is one of those classic puzzles is how do we maximize the use of the spectrum for the benefit of everybody? Is there a way to accommodate all of these interests? And so that's why in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which all of you I'm sure read with great interest, we're trying to tease out what are the different ideas here. Would a private sale mechanism that was outlined in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that some have advocated for be the right approach? Some have said that has the benefit of making a swath of spectrum available within a specific period of time. Others have said, no, we want a more FCC-led process. So that's one of the things we're trying to sort through. I've been meeting with stakeholders from across the board, from the C-band Alliance to cable operators and programmers and others, we look forward to getting all that input and synthesizing it and trying to figure out a way to make the right decision. It's important for us to make the right decision, not to make a right now decision, sure, so to speak, because we understand that there are a lot of interests in this particular band that need to be accommodated.
What do you think about in terms of timing?
So again, here too, it's much more important for us to get it right as opposed to moving very, very quickly. And so we are deliberating as vigorously as we can, and hope to reach a resolution at some point in the future once once we figure out how the puzzle pieces fit properly.
Digital divide.
Yeah.
As a result of your order, again, we've seen the evidence of deployment and investment, and you certainly have continued to focus on going out into America to find places, to isolate areas, identify places that continue to need broadband service. Tell us about the steps that you're implementing at the FCC to take that further, whether it's through another Connect America Fund, reverse auction, there's the Remote Areas Fund. Tell us about the steps that you're taking to really identify those places that need broadband and how to get it to them.
Great question. So as you know, there are basically two tools in the toolbox that the FCC has. One is updating our regulations to encourage you to invest, but the other one is reforming our federal subsidy program, the Universal Service Fund, to make sure that we allocate those scarce dollars, taxpayer dollars, in a way that gets the most bang for the buck, as you were pointing out in your opening. And so through the Connect America Fund, one of the things that always struck me by over the past years before I became chairman was we have all of these great ACA members out there building broadband, doing the hard work, creating this infrastructure. We should encourage them to participate in our auctions. And so in the Connect America Fund Phase 2, which we set up, I think, oh my gosh, it was February 2017, feels like ages ago, but we wanted to make sure that we open up that system for competition in our reverse auction from small cable members like you. And so we're really pleased with the fact that cable rose to the challenge. I mean, you have fantastic infrastructure. You're dedicated to serving some of these unserved parts of the country. As you pointed out, you've already served without federal support 840,000 different locations, which is tremendous. And so we want to extend the entrepreneurial zeal that you have through our Connect America Fund process. And so we've allocated now about $1.5 billion in funding to unserved parts of the country, and we're right now working pretty quickly to make sure that we can get that funding distributed. We've essentially authorized it, now we have to distribute it in a way that is coherent, and so we're working very hard on that. Thinking about the next steps, Connect America Fund Phase 3, a Remote Areas Fund. Those are some of the very important issues, but at this point, we're working pretty hard on the distribution of CAF2 funding, and so we haven't yet made any decisions on that. But what I can tell you is that I personally know that there are many parts of the country that are off the grid, so to speak. We want to make sure that as we take those next steps, we include you as part of the conversation, because we recognize that technological neutrality is important. It's no longer the case that one sector of the industry should be the one tasked with doing this job. We want every sector of the industry to compete through this reverse auction. That's good policy, and it's also, frankly, good finance from our perspective. The more competition you have for these scarce dollars, the less the downward pressure on prices that we'll find during the reverse auction. And part of the reason why it's $1.5 billion as opposed to the $5 billion we originally envisioned was that we did open it up to competition from other sectors. So thank you for that, and we really look forward to working with you to extend that promise of CAF.
You can count on it. We also appreciate the fact that in your programs you have focused on putting resources where they're needed in unserved areas compared to areas that are already served by our members or otherwise. So that's an important point.
It's so critical, and it's one that I'm shocked has to be told over and over again. If you are doing the job, take those 840,000 locations. I mean, you took the risk to raise funds to build that infrastructure. If someone came over the top of you with federal funding to overbuild you, I mean, that's a disincentive for you to do that take that kind of risk again. And so what we've said is, look, the basic principle that these funds should be allocated to unserved parts of the country is a foundational principle for this program. We don't want to displace private capital. We don't want to disincentivize some of the smaller companies that are doing the hard work to build broadband. So let's focus our efforts on unserved parts of the country. And I'm happy to say, at least on Capitol Hill and whenever I travel around, that's a principle that finds very, very broad and bipartisan support.
Indeed, indeed. All right. One other principle that's kind of tied to that is not only do we want to focus resources where broadband's needed, but also who has broadband and who doesn't. So there we're talking about mapping, and it was certainly an issue that a number of senators asked a few weeks ago when, as you mentioned, I had the chance to testify in front of the Senate Commerce Committee on Infrastructure. Tell us about your views regarding mapping, what's needed, what you think is most critical from a mapping perspective, and maybe what kind of time frame it would take to actually develop a new broadband map.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously this has generated a fair amount of discussion, including during that hearing, as you pointed out. And from our perspective, mapping is important for a few different reasons. I mean, number one, it is just critical to more informed decision making. Under my leadership, we set up what we call the Office of Economics and Analytics. And the analytics part of that involved data analytics, making sure that we have all of the data that we need in order to make a fully informed decision. Well, accurate broadband data is an important input into virtually everything we do. And so that's one of the reasons why we think this mapping initiative, updating the Form 477 process in the lingo, is really important. The second reason is, in particular, when we're talking about structuring our Universal Service Fund reforms, we want to make sure that we have an accurate sense of where broadband is and where it isn't, because the last thing we want to do, going back to that foundational principle, is allocate funding to part of the country that already has broadband, especially when so many parts of the country don't. And the third thing is, from a consumer perspective, I mean, we think it helps consumers make more informed decisions, because at the end of the day, they want to know, okay, what are my competitive options? And they might be able to find out through other means, but we think that accurate mapping, which lists out all the competitors and speeds and technologies and the like, is the best way to do that. And so for those reasons, we think this is a really important initiative. Now, that said, it's not easy to do. As you know, as your members know, it's very complicated to figure out a way to balance the need for accurate and complete information with some of the burdens. And so that's one of the things we're currently doing, and we look forward to continuing that conversation to make sure that at the end of the day, we have the information we need in order to do the job that is entrusted to us.
Are you thinking of any particular kinds of approaches that might be better than others for mapping?
We're still working with all those stakeholders from the cable industry, from other industries. There's no particular one that we're putting a thumb on the scale in favor of at this point, but what we do want to try to bring people together around is this principle that accurate mapping benefits everybody at the end of the day, and so we're pretty optimistic at that point.
Let me ask you something else that you've spent a lot of time on, and that's trying to solve some other pesky problems that are out there.
Yeah.
Robocalls in particular,
Oh,
emergency communications, another issue. Tell us about robocalls and your experience dealing with
this issue drives me crazy as a consumer, not just as a regulator. I get them all the time, and especially now, whenever I get a call that isn't programmed, the number isn't programmed into my phone, I have a feeling, okay, well, probably just won a vacation from Marriott.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Whenever you got one of those calls,
yeah,
did you ever answer it and said,
"Oh yeah, I
am the FCC chairman"?
No, but so I've done that once, and the guy hung up immediately, so I don't think he took me seriously. But no, every now and then I do answer just to string them along, and it's just it's incredible the amount of effort. I mean, if they would pour this entrepreneurial zeal into something productive, we would have cured cancer, or we would have, it's just, there's so much better stuff to do out there. But this is an issue that drives people crazy. It's the #1 category of consumer complaints that we get. And I'm as frustrated as anybody, and that's part of the reason why we've been taking really active steps on both the regulatory and enforcement sides to stem this tide. From the regulatory side, we've told the industry to embrace call authentication, essentially a digital fingerprint for every single phone call that gets transmitted. And in this regard, I want to thank you, ACA, because you were a founding member of the governance authority, that Secure Telephone Identity Governance Authority, which is critical to making sure that that digital fingerprint is affixed to every single phone call. And I know the details are as arcane as it gets, but at the end of the day, if we're able to make that digital fingerprint a reality, then every single company that carries a phone call won't carry it if it doesn't have the certificate, which cuts off a lot of these robocalls that people don't want to get. So thank you for that. We hope to see implementation in 2019, and we're seeing a lot of positive steps so far. But time is not on the side of the American consumer, of course, and so we want to make sure we act quickly. And on the enforcement side, too, the biggest fines that have ever been levied in the FCC's 85-year history have been under my leadership to go after these robocallers, because we want to send a message to all of them. This is not going to be a profitable business model for you long term, and it's something that, as I said, drives us crazy, as I'm sure it drives you crazy, too.
Well, you're great on social media, so I want to
That's
see
one word for it. I don't know.
Well, you are. You're very good at it. Lighthearted in many ways. So I really want to see that video where you get a call and someone's videoing, where you're actually interacting with the guy, and finally lower the boom.
There's one in particular. I get it. It's pretty much every single day at the same time, and I just know it's coming. And every time I see that area code, I'm like, all right. Well, here it goes, and so we'll just play around with it. This, I'll make sure I tag you. And
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So on a serious note regarding some other pesky problems, I know you've worked a lot on improving emergency communications. Yeah. You visited a number of our member systems, for instance, down in Puerto Rico and the USVI, and that's an important, really, part of your agenda. Tell us about what you've been working on there.
Oh, thanks so much. And I don't know if they are here. Puerto Rico.
They are.
Thank you for the hospitality and showing me in some of the worst situations that Americans ever have to confront what it is you're doing. I mean, for those of you who just didn't have a chance to go there, or at least to see it, I mean, in some of the parts of these territories, they really looked just like a bomb had gone off. I mean, the infrastructure was completely destroyed. And so I was out there in the dirt and muck of Utuado, Puerto Rico, seeing some of this cable infrastructure that had been dropped to the ground, in some cases just snapped. In other places, the poles had disappeared, and so people had to do makeshift work by putting bamboo stalks up and holding the fiber up that way. It's just incredible the amount of devastation that happened there. And to see the resilience of the folks in the cable industry who were determined to get up there and literally roll up their sleeves to make sure these communications networks got back up and running was inspiring to us. And it was inspiring to the FCC staff who was down there looking to help you in any way we could. And so that's same thing in the Virgin Islands too. I mean, we saw that level of ingenuity that You just had to make it work. And so going forward, we've set up a disaster recovery working group as part of our Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, inspired in part by those visits I did to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, to make sure that we do everything we can to help you get those networks back up and running. It is not easy at all. Certainly in the context of cable infrastructure, where there are any number of reasons. It could be flooding, it could be wind that knocks over the poles, it could be any number of things that you have to confront. We want to make sure that we work as partners with you and with other stakeholders and energy companies in particular, to make sure we're all on the same page. It's often not the first thing that people think about, non-people who aren't in the field, when they think about emergencies. We need the communications networks, but by God, when an emergency hits, the first thing they do is they want to get in touch with the outside world. And so we've made sure that we've told our federal partners at FEMA and DHS and elsewhere in the government, make sure you think about us when you think about emergency communications. We want to make sure we have a seat at the table, because this is one of the first things that needs to get back up and running.
Well, we have about a minute and a half left, and I can't let you go without asking you a video question.
Okay.
All right. It's something that our members will be taking up to the Hill today as we talk about the Stellar reauthorization and broadcast carriage issues, cable carriage issues, sports programming issues. There is so much more by way of competition today, over the top, streaming, news services, skinny bundles, et cetera, but sometimes we're still locked into regimes of content carriage that are still outdated, or maybe that occur as a result of greater media consolidation. Is there anything on the horizon at the FCC to take a look at this? And also, given these changes in the industry, how do you factor in these changes from a content perspective into your FCC work?
Well, I think you put your finger on the basic premise here that I think virtually everybody, regardless of where they sit on these particular issues, has come to recognize, which is that the marketplace has changed dramatically. I mean, when I think about how my own kids take in video content now, it's through means that were inconceivable when I was a kid. I mean, when I was a kid, it meant 3 broadcast channels, and you've got to be in front of the TV at 8 p.m. on Sunday to watch The Love Boat, if that's your cup of tea, which it was for me back in the day. But now, don't quote me on that if there's any press here. Hopefully C-SPAN put us on the Ocho, so nobody is paying attention to this. But anyway, so we recognize that the marketplace has changed dramatically. I mean, when you look at the explosion of over-the-top competition in particular, one company in particular is pouring $10 billion into original programming and creating infrastructure to deliver that programming to consumers. This is a major change in the marketplace. And so I think what you've seen, and I know you talked to my good friend, Congressman Steve Scalise, and there are others like him in Congress who are looking at, should we think about how to update these rules to reflect the reality that we're in? And so that's something that the FCC is always monitoring. We want to make sure we're on top of those developments as well. And look forward to working with you and Congress and anybody else who's interested to make sure that we get it right.
Well, you have been a terrific friend of our members. You have taken the time to understand them, perhaps more than anybody before in your position, and it's an honor and a privilege to work with you. FCC Chairman Ajit Pai.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. It was a great conversation. It goes so fast.
I know it does. It goes too fast.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much. Oh, thanks, guys. Wow. They're always so kind. I just can't say enough.
They're great. They really appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
There we go.
All right.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you missed any of this conversation with FCC Chair Ajit Pai, you can see it in its entirety on our website, cspan.org. Type Ajit Pai in the search box. And looking at some other live programming coming up today on the C-SPAN networks.